You wake up, you check your phone, you make coffee, you sit at a desk for 8 hours doing something that, if you're honest, doesn't feel like survival at all. You've probably pictured your ancestors differently. Spears raised, eyes locked on a fleeing mammoth, a life measured in kills. But the real answer is far stranger. For most of human history, hunting large animals was rare, unreliable, and often unsuccessful. Most days, most people weren't chasing anything. They were doing something far closer to what you're doing right now than you'd expect. Sitting, talking, fixing things, waiting. So what did your ancestors actually do with their time? Start with a number that breaks the myth completely. In the 1960s, anthropologist Richard Lee spent months living among the Jew/Huanzi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last populations still practicing a foraging lifestyle similar to that of early humans. He expected exhaustion, constant labor, a brutal fight for calories. He found the opposite. Adults worked, on average, about 15 to 20 hours a week to meet their nutritional needs. The rest of their waking hours went to rest. Conversation, storytelling, childcare, tool repair, and social visiting. Lee called this discovery the original affluent society, not because these communities had more possessions, but because they had more time. Their wants were few, and their environment reliably met them. Read that again. 15 to 20 hours. That's less than a part-time job today. This wasn't a fluke of one desert tribe. Similar patterns showed up in studies of other foraging societies across Africa, Australia, and the Americas. The image of the caveman locked in a constant, desperate struggle for food turns out to be mostly a modern invention, a story agricultural and industrial societies told about the past to make their own grueling labor feel like progress. So if they weren't hunting all day, what filled the hours? Talking, mostly. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades studying the Jew-Huanzi and found something revealing about how they used firelight. During the day, conversation tended to be practical, arguments over resources, complaints, economic matters. But once the sun went down and people gathered around the fire, the subject changed almost completely. Stories took over. Myths, gossip about people who weren't present, tales about the dead, the distant, the imagined. Wiesner's research suggested this nightly storytelling wasn't just entertainment, it was social infrastructure. It transmitted values. It built trust. It let people rehearse how to think about others without those others in the room. Firelight, in other words, may have shaped human cognition as much as any tool. Think about what you do after dark today. You scroll through other people's lives. You watch stories about people you'll never meet. You talk about who did what, who said what, who deserves sympathy and who doesn't. You're not so different around your fire. Beyond talking, there was making. Foraging life required constant small-scale craftsmanship, knapping stone tools, weaving cordage, sewing hides, repairing weapons. These weren't heroic acts. They were maintenance, quiet, repetitive, almost meditative labor, not unlike the small chores that fill your evenings now. There was also enormous time spent on relationships that had nothing to do with survival in any obvious sense. Grooming, playing with children, visiting neighboring camps, sometimes walking for days just to see other people, exchange gifts, and strengthen alliances that might matter later. This is where the psychology gets interesting. Evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar has argued that human brains grew large not primarily to solve mechanical problems like tool use, but to manage the staggering complexity of social relationships, tracking who owes who a favor, who can be trusted, who is likely to betray an alliance under pressure. Dunbar proposed that there's a cognitive limit to how many stable relationships one person can maintain, a number now widely cited as roughly 150. Your ancestors weren't spending their days solving math problems or building monuments. They were spending their days managing a mental spreadsheet of other people. Who's angry at whom? Who shared meat last week? Who might share it next week? Does that sound familiar? It should. You do this too. Every text you agonize over, every group chat you monitor, every small social debt you keep track of without writing anything down. That mental spreadsheet never went away. It just changed its inputs. There's a harder truth hiding underneath all this leisure, though. Anthropologist Marshall Salins, who popularized much of this research in the 1970s, pointed out that this abundance of free time depended entirely on limiting wants. Foraging societies weren't wealthy because they had a lot. They were wealthy because they needed very little, and their environment reliably provided it. That's the part modern life quietly abandoned. Agriculture, when it arrived roughly 12,000 years ago, didn't reduce human workload. It increased it dramatically. Farming required longer hours, more physical strain, and far greater vulnerability to famine and disease than foraging ever did. Skeletal remains from early farming communities show shorter stature, more malnutrition, and more repetitive stress injuries compared to their foraging ancestors. So why did humans switch? Not because farming was easier, because it could feed more people per acre, and once a population grew dependent on it, there was no going back. Humanity didn't trade hardship for comfort. It traded free time for security, and then kept trading more and more free time as populations grew and systems demanded more from each person just to stay afloat. You are living at the far end of that trade. 8-hour workdays, commutes, notifications that follow you into bed. All of it is a very recent, very unusual arrangement, historically speaking. A system your body and brain were never designed to expect. Your brain still runs on foraging math. It still treats idle time as normal, even necessary, even though the modern world treats idle time as wasted or suspicious. That gap is part of why rest can feel like guilt instead of restoration. Your ancestors didn't earn their downtime through exhausting labor. They simply had it most days by default. There's one more piece worth sitting with. Around that evening fire, status wasn't built through possessions or job titles. Anthropologists studying foraging bands have repeatedly found strong cultural norms against bragging, hoarding, or acting superior, sometimes enforced through mockery, sometimes through direct social pressure. A skilled hunter who returned with a large kill was expected to downplay it, even joke about how pathetic and scrawny the animal was, specifically to prevent arrogance from taking root. Compare that to a world of curated online profiles, personal branding, and highlight reels. Somewhere in the last few thousand years, humans built systems that reward exactly the behavior their ancestors spent generations training each other to suppress. None of this means the past was paradise. Life expectancy was short. Violence, disease, and hardship were real. Comfort now, in nearly every material sense, outpaces anything a forager ever experienced. But time itself may be the one resource that flowed more freely then than it does now. Not because life was simple, but because want itself was smaller and community did more of the work that money now does alone. So the next time your calendar feels impossible and your evening disappears into a screen instead of a fire, remember what filling the hours actually looked like for most of human history. Not conquest, not survival by force, mostly conversation, mostly relationships, mostly the quiet, ongoing work of being known by the people around you. You wake up, you check your phone, you make coffee, you sit down to manage the same ancient mental spreadsheet your ancestors carried around a fire, just with a different flame lighting up your face.